Okay, we're gonna start with the next session. It's on. There's some music.
Ja, ich kann nicht mehr. Ich habe nicht so viel geschlafen.
Sabine.
Okay.
Danke.
Now I want to ask the next panelists on stage. The next session is going to be on education. What's in use in the field of education, online especially. So, Simon. Yes.
Yeah.
Simon, okay. So we start. Just take your seat.
Afterwards, we're all going to go to the photo studio to take a photo for the book.
Where?
They'll
I go here?
Wherever you want to.
Perfect.
So that's very interesting. I mean, it's funny because I sold it 3 years ago.
Oh,
Hi.
you should have come earlier.
So well,
My name's Simon Levine.
I'm not sure.
Just a very brief word introducing myself, and then
no, but
I'd love our
it's
four
growing. I was more
entrepreneur
I
panelists
used to
to
have
introduce
the
themselves.
largest
I'm a
extracurricular
partner at
activity
Excel,
for
a
children
global
in
venture
Israel,
firm.
100,000 students a year.
And prior to that,
But
spent a dozen
We
years
closed this business.
in internet operations in various
But
companies.
It's still the largest.
The reason I'm
for-profit company.
moderating
It's
this
called
panel is that
Lech
in a
Titzler,
parallel
yeah?
universe, I might have been
Ask
a
Jakob,
teacher
you know,
or professor
everyone knows.
rather than
That's
working
interesting.
with entrepreneurs. So it's something very close to my heart. Developed an investment interest in education where I think there is the opportunity for a significant amount of disruption from new online for-profit and non-profit business models. And in fact, one of the panelists here, Jose Ferreira from Newton, is, just for disclosure, I should say, an Axel-backed entrepreneur. Why don't I turn it over to the four panelists to each introduce themselves, and then we'll get into the thick of the discussion. So Calvin, perhaps you should start.
Sure. So my name is Calvin Chin. I'm co-founder and CEO of Qifang. And Qifang is a web startup in China, based in Shanghai, which is an online student loan company, which is in one part peer-to-peer lending or person-to-person lending, alternative funding sources for students in China who want to study for university or postgraduate training, certification, technical training, these kinds of uses. But in part also kind of human capital investment and career development and social aspects around education as well. So you can think of us as affordability as well as relevance. My own background is, as you can hear from my English, in the US. I've been a teacher, worked in the debt markets, and also worked in web startups. So kind of all boiled into Qifang now.
Jose.
Hi. Hello. Oh, there we go. Hi, I'm Jose Ferreira from Newton. And Newton is an educational platform that works with existing education facilities. The way it works is it's a combined virtual classroom powered by live online video. So you can take the best 20 teachers in a city or a developing world nation, beam them via online video classrooms to everyone in the nation, as long as you can get them, say, a one laptop per child computer. And it's powered by our adaptive learning back end. So all non-classroom-based learning is hyper-adaptive to the individual. So we track so we take, say, textbook publishers' content, any educational publisher content. They use us as a platform, And then all that content is enriched by our technology so that it's adapted to the individual student every single day. A new syllabus is created for that student dynamically based on what concepts they know, how they learn, do they learn best visually, do they learn best with diagrams, how many practice questions, difficulty level of practice questions, how much content by concept to give to each student. Maybe they learn this concept, they need a little bit of stuff over a few different days, but this other concept, they need a whole bunch all at once. The system adapts them at that individual level. And then it uses the power of the network. So if you've got 50 million kids in the network and one kid one day doesn't understand something, the network queries the entire population of 50 million kids to find the optimal learning path for that one kid. So the idea is we power textbook companies' content if they want to go with online textbooks, e-learning companies' content, and some of our own direct-to-consumer products.
It's great. Shai.
Hi, my name is Shai Reshef, and I've started actually 20 years ago. I joined Kidum, which used to be a single product, small test prep company in Israel. I ended up selling it as a group of companies, the largest for-profit group of companies in education in Israel. I sold it to Kaplan in 2005, Kaplan of the Washington Post. Between 2001 and 2004, I lived in the Netherlands where I started the first non-American online university. I sold this company to Laureate in 2004. Actually, presently, I'm the chairman of Kremster.com. Kremster.com is an online study community where hundreds of thousands of students helping each other solving homework questions. Here, I'm announcing the University of the People. The University of the People is the first ever non-profit, tuition-free online university, which actually is going to be launched in April, in 2-3 months. And the idea is that between economic and geographic limitations, higher education for hundreds of millions of people around the world is as unlikely as the merger of Apple and Microsoft. The lack of universal education splinters our world and makes actually further dividing the haves and have-not and the communities they live in. In an age where technology costs are dropping dramatically, enormous access to the internet, and free exchange of information online, these divides are incomprehensible. With the University of the People, we take a decisive step toward democratization of higher education. Between the open source technologies and social networking, by applying these two free concepts into academia, we are basically creating a global chalkboard, a place where students from around the world gather together, embrace peer-to-peer teaching, make the best use of diverse backgrounds, and with the help of top-tier academics. This initiative aims or will make education not for a few, but for the many. And we certainly hope that not only that it will succeed, we will have a lot of people joining us to make this dream a reality.
Thank you. And finally, Alex.
Yeah, hello, good morning. Can you hear me? Okay. Alex is my name, Alex Oleg. I run a chain of schools based in Berlin, here in Germany. The chain is called Forms. There's what's special about Forms. I guess, well, I mean, the idea is really to import whatever is good in education and put it in place in real schools, such as internet technology, but mainly good teaching methods exported from everywhere in the world. We're just expanding internationally with a site, and that gives you an idea what we're doing, a site in a national park in Kenya, to Israel. We're expanding to China, to the US, and probably in the very near future to South America. And the idea really is create one curriculum for our students that would be the same everywhere, whether that's in China or in South America. Students and teachers could be shuttled around the world and basically teach cultural differences or by experience rather than from textbooks. Of course, in binding and it should be a global network within the next 5 years or so. The thing is growing fantastically, so we can support quite a number of new schools in the next couple of years. Of course, binding a network of schools together in a meaningful fashion means, apart from basically exchanging the teachers and create a really probably the first really global school, which is consists of different entities but that really work together. We're using a lot of tools like online teaching. We're broadcasting lessons from one school into the classroom of another. Obviously, all the teaching materials are in a learning database. It's quite new stuff. And so we invested in internet platforms that support these things. And I guess we'd have a big amount of benefit from things like yours if we could integrate those. Yeah, that's it basically.
Great. So just by way of context, a few statistics. Education is a very significant industry globally. It actually accounts for about 4.3% of global GDP. So it's a few $1 trillion. Touches most people's lives in the sense that all of us went to school, many to college, and our children too. So at any given moment, there's roughly 15 to 20% of the world's population either studying or involved in education directly. So my first question to the panel, perhaps we can start with Jose, is what in your opinion is kind of most broken about the education industry worldwide? What is the single biggest issue that we face?
Yeah, well, I wish I could give you just one. But if I had to pick one, I mean, there's obviously a lot of quality issues and a lot of reasons around quality issues, but if I had to pick one, it'd be access. There's 1.25 billion school-aged kids in the world, and about 1 billion of them don't have basic reading or writing or math skills. So they can't compose a simple letter, they can't do basic arithmetic. That's 1 billion kids, and that is a gateway issue to every other problem the world faces.
Calvin?
I think access is certainly a big problem in China, something we're working on, but to that I'd add relevance. So in China what we find is a lot of, of the 25, 26 million university students, 6 million graduate each year, many of those can't find work because they're not ready for work. So companies have to invest a lot in training those people to have the relevant skills for industry and for the private sector. So I'd say relevance is also kind of a big problem.
I think that one of the main problems is government and teachers' union. I think that the problem is that the 20th century or the 21st century technology offers a lot of advantages that can be used in school system. I think that the bureaucracies stop them. They're afraid of losing what they have, changing the present situation, really try to stop change. And I think that that's the main problem these days in education worldwide.
So access, relevance, the government.
Oh, yeah, no, for me it's very simple. It doesn't move. And that's, I mean, you have to look at teachers. By the way, I don't believe in you can fully teach online. So teachers would always have to transmit the knowledge in some way. You can use online tools to support that. But I don't believe in pure online education. What I see as a problem, teachers don't move. They don't work as teams. They don't talk to each other. They don't travel. They have no travel or communication budgets. They have none of the methods that companies would use to get better. And they're pretty inert. So, i.e., all the technology we're developing, and I've been in that business for a while, it hits a wall when you present it to a teacher. They would just say, no, we don't want this. And as long as we don't get to the teachers, we can work as much as we want. I think we will have no influence on the education system. I mean, I'm being polarizing here, but that's the hard one, to really convince those guys to take all those brilliant ideas on board.
So why do you think they're resistant to change? Why
I have no clue, really. I'm trying to find that out, because we're changing schools. But
if I may comment, I think that saying that you cannot teach online is like, whoa, we are not in the 19th century, not even in the 18th century. I think that the problem is, in many cases, the teachers. Because when you think about it, schools started 200 years ago with a teacher standing in front of the class listening, the students listen, the teachers speak, that's it. That's 200 years ago. You look at classes today,
still the
same thing exactly. And basically, when you think about it, well, in most cases, would the teacher know more than the students? Well, I doubt it. Does he have better he or she has better information that can be found on the internet? No way. Is it the best way of teaching? No way. For some students, yeah, it's great to listen to a teacher, and that's the way they study. Well, even those students, in many cases, would prefer to rewind and listen again and again to the teacher, which online they can do it. They cannot do it in real life. But many students, the best way for them to study is to talk to their peers, go to the library, read books, go and discuss it in study groups. Many ways. Teachers cannot afford it. Online can afford it. Actually, in many cases, teachers are the barrier for studying, not the enablers of studying. And I think that teachers these days are fighting not to change, because the role is going to be changed, and they're afraid to change it because they don't know what to face.
I disagree. I don't think it's about the students and the applicability of online education. I think it's more about the content. So there are kinds of content, kinds of knowledge that can be conferred very well online through a video, through some other kind of multimedia format. But I think other kinds of learning need the enabler, as you're talking about, need that facilitator. And that's something that cannot be, today at least, delivered very well online.
And what about in China, where not everyone is online?
I think that's another kind of key barrier, and why educators and the existing infrastructure need to be a focus of solution and innovation.
So if we step back and talk about what have been the significant changes in education. 2,000 years ago, someone came up with the idea of blackboard and chalk, and maybe a few hundred years ago, I guess 700 years ago, Gutenberg invented the printing press, and so the augmentation of learning went from a blackboard to a book. 200-300 years ago, nation states started building schools, and educating universally became a public good. If we fast forward 20 years to, say, the year 2030, what do you expect to be the significant change to happen in education? What can we see that will break this status quo? Do you want to take it first?
Yeah, I'm jumping in. I think that what would really make the difference is social networks. I think that I joined Cramster.com. It's a company that I joined a few months ago as the chairman, and I think that I learned there how strong, how powerful communities are. Students coming online and teaching each other things that they don't get. And I think that that's really changed the way education is going to be handled. By the way, that's the main way we are going to teach at the University of the People. Students are going to teach each other. They will read the material, but they will be able to discuss it and learn it and absorb it by talking online to their peers and to educators. But I think that it is what happened in the last few years, the social networks, is something that will go into education and change education to the way it has never been before. Because it is something very powerful, but more so because that's how youngsters live these days. When you look at youngsters, they are there all day long. Use it for education will be something that they would embrace, would love it, would make education better for them, will make it something likable for them, and it will change, on the other hand, education as well.
Alex,
yeah, well, I would totally disagree, actually. When I was supposed to, by the way. No, but I think if we look at what's everyone saying we should teach our children, it's basically becoming, whenever we do that, we're coming closer and closer to those sorts of soft skills. If you look at what makes a successful person in life, it's not whether he learned mathematics. It's usually, can he talk to people? Are we able to interact? That's the social. We call that cultural technology, basically, for our students. Can we communicate across borders? Pick up the telephone rather than use the email, which is usually leads to escalating conflicts electronically. Everyone knows that. The more email you write, the more conflict you have. That's normally so. I.e., I'm basically forbidding some people to use it altogether in my company. So basically, we're looking at education systems should train our children to develop more of those social skills, and on the other hand, we're saying everything should move online, which is a big discrepancy between what we say our kids should learn and the methods we start employing. I'm not saying online is bad. I'm saying to cram knowledge into people's heads, it's probably very good. But it's not good for what we should educate our children to become in the future. I.e., we have to make that separation. And actually, when it comes to teaching in 20 years, I think there will be no difference. It will have started, but I don't think we will see any overall recognizable difference in global school systems in 20 years, because it's so fucking slow. I'm sorry for my expressions here, but that's basically what comes to mind. And online, if we employ it the wrong way, i.e. we try and substitute schools with online tools, we're going to go the other way. We're going to go backwards in time. Less teamwork, less social skills, more factual stuff, i.e. back to the 18th century. We may bridge that gap at some point. Holographic video conferencing, where you really think you're sitting opposite of a real person. But I don't think we should try and substitute real human-to-human interaction, which is what schools are, by an anonymous online tool, i.e. Let's use online where it's good and not to substitute schools. And
I mean, you are in the bricks and mortar business, but do you think that changes when students get older? I mean, is there an age where that truth that you've articulated migrates at all?
I don't think there's any difference at any age, really. Even us, we should talk to each other. I pick up the telephone when I manage my companies, or I fly. I'd not use email. No, because it's gonna kill my company if I do that. I talk to people, and the more I do that, the more successful these things run. The more I seclude myself behind my screen, the more conflict I have, and the less well it works. It's absolutely clear. I need that smile in order to see, and it's not a video smile. It needs to be a real one. In order mimics to see how my. I mean, it may be at low level. You may be able to substitute education for an online tool, but at management level, it's a big
I think, Alex,
mistake.
that'll be tough to pull off in a carbon neutral way, right?
Sorry.
Can I just riff on that a little bit? I think what you're talking about is a different set of priorities or expectations on education, and I'd agree that maybe not necessarily what I envision would be in 20 years, but maybe what I would hope would be part of that, and maybe what would allow for that is an expectation with pervasive computing, with access, hopefully, through initiatives like one laptop per child or other means for the internet to be accessible to, the base of the pyramid all the time.
Absolutely.
That you wouldn't necessarily need to teach the person some of the, let's say, mid-level mathematics or higher-level mathematics that you spend a lot of time teaching them today. As long as they can interact with this base of global knowledge in a very quick and efficient way, then that skill set.
Well, I'm all for it, of course.
Right,
yeah?
right.
I'm just cautioning people who say, well, education will move more and more online. I think it will move the other way around, and we're just gonna put the old stuff onto online tools, yeah, like facts, knowledge, and not skills.
So I have to disagree with both of you, I'm afraid. I mean, I have to disagree with my friend Shai, because I just don't think replacing the traditional teacher-led model entirely with peer-to-peer is realistic. I think it's going to be an increasingly important aspect of education going forward, but I think education in 20 years will still be a teacher-led model. I think what we need to do to reform it is make the teachers better. And unfortunately, the access problem is one that Calvin and I worry about a lot, and we're not going to solve that with bricks and mortar schools.
No,
so it's got to be done online. Now, I think in some ways online is better. In some ways it's not as good. And one of the things we can do with Newton, for instance, is we can take the best Middle Eastern Arabic philosophy professor, in all of the USA at some school, and we can expose that person to, maybe the top person at Princeton, top teacher, and we can expose that person to, inner city kids, people who would never in a million years get access to that person. And they get, live video instruction. They get more hours than they would get in a regular bricks and mortar classroom.
We use those tools. That's well employed.
Well, so you're using online.
But it's not...
I don't think that I meant to say that there is no room for teachers. So that's the first thing. I think that there is room for teachers. I think that the role is going to change dramatically. And what I was trying to say is that teachers are not willing to change the role these days. And they need a big shake-up in order to be changed. And it might not be them, because it is going to be different. There are going to be different requirements from teachers. So I'm not sure that the teachers that exist right now would be the right teachers of the future. So this is the first thing. The second thing is that we should be aware that the way children or youngsters behave these days. And when you look, and when I look at my kid, and he's coming home, and he's next to the computer from the minute he comes home until he goes to sleep, and I tell him, go meet your friends. He said, what do you mean? I'm meeting them. I ask, when do you meet them? Right now on the computer. That's their social life. Well, we can fight it as much as we want, but that's their life. That's their lives. So we can somewhat affect it, but we should look at it and say, okay, how do we make the best out of it and affect it somehow? But to say, okay, since we think that your social skills are not very well because you are online, therefore you are going to school, and therefore you are not going to be exposed to technology, well, it's not black and white. And the question is, what is the right mixture?
Well, if you ask me, my kids don't do that. They spend very little time on the computer. They're in a whole day school. When they come home, they do play with friends. And they're at the age where they could well use social network tools. So, no, I don't necessarily think we have to follow fashion and adapt society to basically what the technology offers. It may well happen, and then we have to react in schools. My way of protecting my children from becoming anonymous letters on a screen, basically, which is what it is by sending them to a whole day school. When they come home, they have a half hour left to work on the computer, but they're interacting socially all day, and they can manage a meeting at the age of 8.
If I can just get back to the original question of what it's going to look like in 20 years, my strong sense is it's going to be a blended model. There's obviously going to be bricks and mortar, and there's obviously going to be more online. And the bricks and mortar will probably consist of fewer schools with fewer teachers at those schools, but better teachers. And the reason that's going to happen is because you're going to have live video classes or holograms or whatnot, but you're going to be able to beam in teachers for more obscure subjects that bricks and mortar schools don't cover anymore. The bricks and mortar schools will focus on core curricula and get better at that. And because you're going to have a replacement technology, which is, if your chemistry teacher retires or leaves, the current technology in the United States for coping with that anyway is you get the gym teacher to teach chemistry for a year. That's the current solution. That's ridiculous, right? In the future, you'll have the neighboring district has got a great chemistry teacher. You'll beam that person in live video conference for live over the internet video for a year until you can find a better chemistry teacher. And at some point, people are going to say, that's a basic threshold of quality, and the existing teachers who fall below that threshold will slowly be weeded out of the system. So you'll have fewer teachers, fewer schools, better schools, and better technology to handle all the outside of the classroom activity.
I think that we should put things in perspective, because talking about what's the best to our children or our communities is nice. But we should remember that there are billions of people around the world that have no education whatsoever. And I think that the online is the only way to close the gap. no matter what we want, we are unable to build schools for that many students in a short period of time. We are unable to have enough teachers to teach them well enough. And the only way to close the gap is online education. And whether it's the best method or not the best method, that's a different question. That's the only method that is there to reach these students. And when I look at our program, the University of the People, and when we get to Africa, you know, people would say, well, is it the best university for them to study? I don't know if it's the best university. I know one thing. That's the only choice. We are creating the alternative to nothing. And that's what the online enables us. That's the internet, what the internet enables us, to reach places where they have no alternative. So that's the perspective that I think we should put into this discussion.
Yeah, I agree, Charlie.
Well, Calvin, do you have anything to add in terms of what the world will look like in 20 years?
I could certainly argue with Alex for a very long time about
the
value of my social identity online, but as somebody who lives online now and tries to be social online, but I think as Shai is talking about the very young and how they interact with technology, I can't suppose to know how my 3-month-old daughter will want to learn and how her peers will learn. And then as she moves into the workforce, what are going to be relevant social skills for her? But I'm really curious and love to talk more about that transition from this kind of legacy system where we've got maybe it's 200 years old or longer infrastructure and distribution channel and vested interests. But how do you move to fewer teachers? How do you move to teachers who are not resistant to change? Because in every market that I've ever seen, and certainly in China as well, you do have these legacies of people who will fight, tooth and nail.
That's political work. I mean, you have to make the job of a teacher more attractive first. That it's not got a good reputation and the salaries aren't good. The work is damn hard to stand in a classroom. And that's basically where you got to start to change, I suppose. That's why I'm saying in 2030 we'll just be beginning to see any change, even if we react now. It's a generation of teachers that we need to flush out and substitute by better ones, more motivated, basically teachers that do take on board online tools. But I tell you what, online teaching, we do experiment with those. We have fantastic teachers in certain schools that we can never hire into other schools. So certain children have an advantage over others. So what we're trying to do is broadcast those lessons, of course, into other schools and have other children benefit from that. Now, the point is, we're employing 2 teachers per class on 20 students, so that's pretty fancy, actually. What happens is, if you broadcast the lesson and don't have a teacher in the other classroom, the learning effect is 0. Nothing is learned. If you have an assistant in that classroom to basically translate and it's always teacher, assistant that we use. If you have a human being, take that knowledge and get people, stimulate the children to work and take that fantastic lesson, translate it into something practical, you suddenly have a bombastic effect in learning. But you do get an online lesson. We do study that. It's 0. The learning effect is 0, even if there is a human being, big screen, like these smart boards, you know them. We do that. There's no learning if you don't have the human interaction.
Well, you're not actually claiming that online learning has been definitively proved to have zero effectiveness?
We're talking primary school here, so it may be different. We're talking primary school, and we do use it to feed facts a lot. Yeah. But that's not learning. Nowadays, we're moving away from learning to education, you see?
Okay, but just so we're clear, you've defined the experiment yourself by your own definition of what learning is, and then you've done some
absolutely.
Internal studies.
I'm saying learning, yes. In education, it works not at all. Learning, yes, it does work. If you want to feed knowledge and you have a motivated child, intrinsically motivated child, you do get the stuff fed in, of course. If the child isn't motivated, the effect is 0, of course, i.e. what you're doing is increasing the gap between the motivated and non-motivated. Yeah? The motivation doesn't work online. That's the big problem. And motivation to learn is what the teacher's job is, you see? It's not feed the knowledge. It's basically get the kids to want to learn. That's the teacher's job. And if they do that, the rest can be fed online. But if you don't do that, the learning effect is 0. Even if the parents stand behind that kid and tell him to please do that tasked online now. The learning effect is zero, and there are huge social studies proving that. With a secondary student who's intrinsically motivated, of course you get there. And that's where your online tool should be employed.
But you know what, I mean, no one was intrinsically motivated to learn their multiplication tables,
Absolutely.
but everyone in the room did because someone stood over them making them do it.
No.
It's not, you can't,
I would argue that teachers, in most cases, are the best anti-motivation tool that you can put in
You're
class.
right, there are bloody bad teachers
And
around.
therefore, if you go online and you find other methods, it might be a better motivation.
No.
Well,
I think there's another factor as well, the quality of what is being conveyed online, right? So if you've got a lecture put on a big screen, I could, suppose to agree with your 0%, your zero learning factor. But with a more engaging model of online interaction, maybe it's through a game or through some sort of peer model,
Sure.
then I think there are online solutions to the motivation question.
I will totally disagree. Absolutely. And now look at, say, 10, 15 years of attempts to get online education up and running. They're all stillborn so far. We can wonder why that is.
You know why? Because of people, because of teachers, because of people who hire teachers who refuse to make the change.
Well, true.
And because of government, I'm serious. And because of governments coming and say, we should reform education, but then they need the vote of the teachers and the teachers' union, and therefore they make no change except for declaring it, but they don't make the changes.
And technology. To be fair, Alex is attacking a straw man. You're saying that online education of today or the last 10 to 15 years, the most interesting stuff in online education is just beginning to happen now and will happen in the next 10 years. You need to compare your bricks and mortar model to that.
I'm positive. I wish you'd prove me wrong. I'm taking a conservative stance because I'm seeing 700,000 teachers. I know that motivation, and there's proof over proof, that motivation is really the thing that gets children to learn. And not university, that's different, totally different because they are intrinsically motivated. And what I'm seeing is a workforce of teachers, 718,000 in Germany, who are bad motivators, i.e. I have a huge problem there. And my secondary problem then is how, if you prove me wrong, I would be absolutely pleased because then I can leave those teachers alone and let them do a bad job. I'd be very pleased. I can't risk it, really. At the moment, my children, we haven't found a method to replace teachers, but we have found methods to train teachers to become better teachers. That at least has worked.
So I have a question that's sort of tangentially related to this discussion, which is that you're all entrepreneurs, some of you for-profit, one a new non-profit. How important is the market and the for-profit motive in changing the education world? Because I think the statistic that I read is that less than 10% of all those $2.5 trillion that's spent on education worldwide each year is for-profit. Most of it is government, most of it is inert, non-profit, folks working for the good of humankind rather than for money. Is money an important factor here or not? Who's the customer? Is it the individual student or is it the government or the parent?
Who you're asking?
Whomever wants to take it.
Yeah, I don't think it's a very important factor yet. I think in the business models that are still being developed, it might become an important factor.
Money makes inventive, doesn't it? I mean, it's a big carrot. For us, it's obviously a motive to be a profitable organization because it is a good measure of success because of our customers, and that's the parents, obviously, in a private school chain. Our customers put us under pressure to perform in whatever ways. And we can define those ways in a dialogue with the parents of those kids. But they put us under pressure, and they don't put governments under pressure because there's no pressure point. See?
I think profit motive certainly makes sense for tertiary education where we are. But I think fundamentally education is still a human right, and for that 3-year-old, 5-year-old, 7-year-old, I'm not sure profit motive is going to necessarily convey broad education to everyone.
You're right. The governments will have to follow. What we can do for them is we can show them, we can invent methods and show that the system, if it moves, it can become better. We have to rely on governments to follow. I'm not saying replace private education, public education with private, but you need the innovation engine And that is
So
never
I think
going to
what
be
we're
the
talking about then
government.
is business mentality,
Yeah,
metrics
absolutely.
and so forth, right?
That's why I'm saying the money in itself, I've got enough of that, and so most of my colleagues, we're happy people, and the money is not what drives us, but the money is a way to measure whether we perform, and therefore it's an important factor in our business, because parents are paying €1,000, up to €1,000 per month, and they really want to know that we get them a good, their child a good education. That's wonderful pressure.
Did you ever think about making your schools non-profit when you started, or was that never in the
The
equation?
schools themselves are non-profit anyway because the German legislation demands it. We earn by licensing and developing and selling the systems and the management capability to those schools, i.e. we run a holding company which is for-profit and the schools themselves are not for profit. No, I wouldn't do that really because that minute the pressure is gone.
What about you, Shai? Why did you choose to make your latest endeavor a non-profit entity?
Well, two reasons. First of all is a personal reason. I made enough and now it's my turn to give back. So that's my personal contribution to society or to the world. But I think that it's more so because in order to succeed, I need a lot of people to join. I need a lot of volunteers to be teachers, to write material, to be librarians, and I cannot ask people to join and to be part of my community if I make money out of them. So that's another reason. But I do believe that for-profit education has an extremely role in education to push forward the education. It would live side by side. And if we look at online universities, well, that mainly started as a private for-profit initiatives. And up to date, the biggest players there are for-profit universities. So, and all the initiatives actually of non-profit universities at the early 21st century failed. And the for-profit university paved the way for everyone to follow, how it would work, etc., etc. So in this sense, it plays an extremely important role. And I think that it will always live side by side. For-profit, non-for-profit, the majority would be non-profit, but there always will be segment of for-profit which has value.
So one of the other things that, just to switch subjects a little, that we've talked about is how important is technology and the internet going to be in the future of education? Maybe just to concretize that, why don't you each pick one site that you think is very interesting and shows something, a glimpse of the future that you find useful? You may not have one, Alex, but it'll be, maybe we can start with Jose.
Sure, I'd probably pick the One Laptop Per Child initiative. It's not a site, but it's an initiative, and they may not even succeed themselves, but they have paved the way, and everyone else is being forced to adopt to them. So Microsoft and Intel are now trying to compete because they don't want to give up a generation of kids in the developing world to these One Laptop Per Child. There's an outfit in Taiwan that's producing one that's apparently way better than One Laptop Per Child and does a lot of the same stuff. So that is going to be part of the solution to access. Is once you can make laptops cheap enough, or some kind of laptop Kindle hybrid, that you can crank up or gets, the way you can the One Laptop Per Child, so you don't even need electricity. Then at least the hardware problem is solved, and that's a more difficult problem because other people are going to come along, like my company and others, that are going to solve the software problem of what to put on the machines.
Okay. Shai?
I would stick to open courseware material and the social networks that will dramatically change the world in general, but the world of education in particular.
So just for the audience, which is the most promising open courseware site or destination that you'd recommend people to check out?
I would send them to MIT Sloan School. Very nice. Go and check it.
Calvin?
To me, I think the most interesting thing online or technologically around education is beyond the things the panel is, of course, doing, are some of the kind of implicit ways young people are learning. So maybe if I had to pick a site, it'd be Google, oddly enough, because how a young person learns by a search or a query is, I think, really different than how I learned, and that, I think, is really exciting.
For us, it's a very obvious one. Whenever technology collaborates with a teacher, that's what I'm driving at anyway. So smart boards, for example, $2,000, I can put them into Africa, and what I can do then is basically train the teacher to translate from technology, which is broadcast in, to translate that into human language and convey it to children. I.e., I think what's needed there is exactly that one big screen, not the laptop, because that isolates the children from what education or the learning really is, i.e. human interaction. I think it's got to be those online tools that broadcast into classrooms, give access to all sorts of things that you don't have locally, but have someone who has learned and studied to interact with that smartboard and translate the knowledge conveyed by this online tool into human language and thereby make the children learn. For me, yeah, I mean, we're opening schools in Africa, and we're putting a smartboard in a broadband internet, and we're using technology very heavily to support us. But we have learned, and many people who run schools have learned that technology on its own, without that human translator, is absolutely totally worthless in small children. I make that difference between the intrinsically motivated students and the ones that aren't, yeah? And you can't do it with children under, say, 15 or so. When they switch into adult thinking, then all that stuff sets in, and I think it's incredibly valuable.
So for myself, it hasn't been mentioned, so I'll bring it up. I think Wikipedia is a very interesting site, not only for the content that's there, but really just for the model, which is there's a hardcore editor and writer group of just 5,000 to 10,000 people that have really created that site. But then in each specific subject area or page, typically, there's one very heavy contributor. And so, if you like, the wisdom of crowds and open collaboration, I think creates a very interesting metaphor for the future of both content and teaching. I think there'll be much more on that front. So I see hands going up already. Maybe we can pass a mic round, or if there isn't a mic, you can stand up and use your voice loudly and ask a question to one of the panelists.
Thank you for a great debate. I think to put in context what people here value in terms of Wikipedia, open courseware, one-to-one computing, and unique content, I think a question that was missing is what is the role of education in the 21st century in the knowledge economy? And so I think that you have to figure out how to integrate all of this just because of the way people work in Google and how they accomplish leadership, how they manage political campaigns, how they learn in corporations, how they design cities, how they do biotech. So you have to really think about new competencies, completely new subject matter and competencies that education has the responsibility, the social responsibility to transfer. And it is about innovation with technology. It's about wiki-like programming environments for people to work in teams and manage the creation of their own ideas and the research that they do as they learn from a very young age. It's about our ability to publish Wikipedia articles, not just to read, our ability to publish courseware, not just to consume, and our ability to blog, not just to read. And all of that needs to start in kindergarten. And it's our ability to work in a social network, Web 2.0, open source, one-to-one environment. Whether we are the bottom billion or the top billion learners, there is a social responsibility for education. So depriving people, teachers and students alike, from participating in that culture is a sin.
So was there a question there?
Yes, I think I want the panelists to comment on the idea of what is the role of education,
right,
and why is it really
You just
forbidden?
described it.
Well,
Oh, good. So you agree, maybe you have other things to add.
I put a finer point to that, though. I think at the base of the pyramid and in China, there are a lot of people who will be consumers of the knowledge economy, but there are a lot of people who should not be primarily trained to be knowledge workers. There's still a tremendous need for manufacturing, for instance, and the employability of somebody with very practical manufacturing trade skills, versus trying to send everyone through four-year university with the expectation that there's a great knowledge economy job waiting for them, I think is where education needs to focus on the needs of both.
You forgot something, by the way.
Yes,
Values. Teach the values.
exactly.
Yeah, and that's got nothing to do with technology, but becomes more important all the time. Of course, I mean, what you say is completely right. How do you teach values to people that you don't reach is a big problem, because value, I mean, there you have to employ technology, but technology doesn't teach values. Again, you need the human interaction.
Technology doesn't teach anything, but the people who
Can be
use
used.
it for being ethical,
Exactly.
responsible, responsive team members
yeah.
can use technology. Technology doesn't teach that.
So I totally agree with what you said, but the value problem, what are the human values underlying any type of education? That's really the big job.
And I guess the question is, how do you make teachers being able
Absolutely.
to transfer values?
Absolutely.
And that's not most of the teachers today. So
No,
we're both
hardly
talking
anyone.
about changing
Yeah.
what teachers are. So
Yeah, they transmit knowledge and no values. And there's, for the knowledge part, if you respect what I said before in terms of translation, for the knowledge part we've got technology. For the values we don't.
Well, let's not ignore the role of parents in the conveyance of values.
Parents are usually incompetent. That's unfortunately so, and I include myself. A professional who understands a child is if he's a good professional, is way better than I would be.
Do we have any other
I would
questions?
doubt that one, but that's a different issue.
we have one at the back here.
I think that everybody seems to agree that teachers can be really empowered through technologies. So with that vein in mind, a lot of industries that see a lot of innovation have environments for people to iterate things, test and iterate. You know, you saw huge innovations obviously in software, and maybe in architecture, the development of CAD allowed people to be more inventive. But with teaching, it seems that if you try something new, you run the huge risk of a whole generation of students that experience lost learning. So given that, how might you see technology creating a test lab for educators?
So the question is, what's the feedback loop, and how do we experiment without losing that particular classroom or generation if we go off piste and make a mistake?
Good point. It's got to be slow. We take it slowly.
But like 200 years, right?
No,
Slow.
I mean, let's talk in decades, man.
But if we complain about the quality of teachers or education, then that needs to be fast. I think the change needs to happen fast.
You're right
but the
there.
feedback loop has to be fast too. So measurability and some of those concepts that we were talking about from a business perspective embedded into education, academia, and performance, evaluation.
Yeah, it'll be an iterative process where some features are adopted very quickly because the feedback is instant or very, very close to instant that they work. So for instance, one of the things that Newton does is it tracks everything that a course was supposed to teach last week, and then it'll send an automatic email to the teacher saying, hey, your class covered 15 concepts last week, but the students only mastered 13. We can see that from their homework. You may want to spend some time on Monday covering this one and this one again. I mean, just reporting functionality that's never existed before. So those will be the first adopted features, and then it'll be an iterative process after that.
Any other questions? In the middle, there's a gentleman, and then we'll come to the front.
Hi, my name is Till. I work for a e-learning company, and Alex, this question refers to you. I would be very interested why you believe so much that it's not possible to motivate children learning intrinsically via the net. You said that a couple of times, and I don't quite get it, because what we see is that children they leverage the internet for communication. I think that Shai was referring to his children, telling how they use the internet, and maybe your children don't. Could be. They live in your school, and they do that 24/7. I understand that, but many kids don't. And we see as of today that life is changing for children. More and more children are using the internet. Probably now the 10, 11, 12-year-olds use the internet. Probably in a couple of years, maybe the 9, 8-year-old children are using it. Why do you not believe that motivation in learning is possible?
I have yet to find a child, the first, that comes home, switch it on the computer, and goes to a learning program. What they do is chatting, games, all sorts of things. I've yet to find the first example of a child that, out of his own volition, switches on the computer to learn maths. It's an unknown, and I've followed tens of thousands of children, i.e., and apart from that, there's research abound in the world that shows that without human interaction, there's no learning. Yeah? You can stand behind your child and get that going for a while. I've yet to find the child that first switches, that uses the computer that way voluntarily. If he doesn't, he's not motivated. And then how do you get the computer when it's switched off or just displays a game or a chat? How, in that situation, do you get the computer to motivate you? It's kind of hard because it's not even making an attempt. Yeah, so why would it?
I think games can be a fantastic way to teach. And I think if I think of the social skills that you say are so important, I think of a Warcraft guild, self-organizing on a mission.
You don't send your child to a school that uses games as a...
No, but I think the leadership qualities necessary in that guild to accomplish the mission.
We all know that most kids hate school. What are we talking about?
No, they don't. They love it.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
I guess we are from a different world. Home, the first thing they do is switch on the TV.
And they come to school, they are being locked together with other students and the teacher,
they love it.
Which lecture to them, and yeah, they love it. They come home and say, oh, too bad, only 8 hours. Can we do it 20 hours?
You've been to...
So they love the computer. They love the games. Let's make fun out of it. Let's teach them through this.
Go to Africa and ask any child out of 1,000. 1,000 will answer. What's your dream? And they will tell you, go to school. Yeah. Now, if you have, if you look at schools that use really bad teachers, of course you get that symptom. But normally, my children kick up a tantrum if I want to pick them up a half hour earlier from school. Yeah? And that is, in a good school, that's absolutely the norm and not the exception. That's why you have to have good schools. And I'm very sorry, very bluntly, I don't think you can use the computer to educate children. You can support teachers, and it's enormously important to support teachers and parents with computers, and I don't disagree. Full-blown technology employment in our school. They look so high-techy you would be amazed. Yeah. If you try to supplant or substitute real teaching with computers, you're gonna produce idiots.
Well, I'll be equally blunt. Your model can't educate the 1 billion kids who don't have education.
Sure,
right
it can.
No, it can't.
Absolutely.
It's totally
Look at
unscalable.
Asia. Look at Asia 20 years ago, 30 years ago. How many educated people in China 30 years ago? It can tell you the percentages. Secondary education in China 30 years ago. Nowadays, 100%. 30 years and 1.5 billion people came from zero education to full-blown secondary education.
Well,
you can.
I'm not sure it was zero, but okay.
Well, not zero, but I mean, comparably.
100%.
It was low. It was low.
We have a lady here at the front.
Yes, I would probably like to take some fire out of the discussion. We talked about technology, about kids, about school, about teachers. What about the parents? This is a quite powerful source of education. I think we can't close that session talking about the parents, right? And what do parents need? What do they want for their kids? They really care about them. I mean, we have 13 million parents here in Germany. They're looking for the best school for their kid. They're not sending them to the next school around the corner. They try to find the best one. They need transparency. They need information. Yeah, what we have, I mean, that is government political issues. What do we know about schools, how good schools are? So I think the parents are very important. Don't miss them.
Great. Well, study after study shows that the more you get parents involved, the better students do. And those studies, I think, are non-dubious studies. And one of the things that Newton tries to do is, like we send emails to teachers, we send emails to parents. Now, if they ignore them, that's too bad. But as if you've got a kid who goes home and reads a Newton Power textbook, then you get an email every week saying, or every day if you like, your kid didn't do his homework today, or she's having trouble converting fractions to decimals. Could you spend some time with her? So if you empower parents, you give them the tools to get more involved. I think that's number one. We also give them reporting like, did you know that your daughter learns best visually? Here's the kinds of things you want to do to put her in position to be successful.
Do you want an answer from me? It's very simple. We should dedicate part of our schools to teaching the parents. and bring them on board. And that's one of the things we want to do in the future, because whenever we have a problem with a small child, it's usually the parent's problem and not the children's. There's no exception to that rule. And i.e. what we need to do is basically, include the parents and develop a collaboration model between the school and the parents. I.e. we teach the parents and the parents teach us. The biggest thing in motivating a child, by the way, is the consistency of the feedback that the child gets in the school and from the parents. It makes not so much a difference whether that's good feedback or bad feedback. Motivation, the consistency of that really makes education powerful. The reinforcement of messages, i.e. the schools have to include the parents very much, and on a probably weekly, daily basis, talk to parents and tell them what feedback they should give, and the other way around. And that's, of course, to be established. Technology is hugely important there, yeah? But it's again, a different way of employing it that I would promote.
We had another question from a gentleman here. Oh, well, this fellow's got the microphone. You come next, please.
I've just one remark to add to this discussion. I'm not so skeptical about the use of self-learning, IT and e-learning with children, because every young child, I think, has some kind of a built-in hunger for new stuff, for learning, for exploring things. And unfortunately, it is the school who often turns off this hunger. I remember last year's DLD, we had this fantastic Indian professor who made an experiment. He put a computer with internet access in India, in a rural area, with no electricity, no internet access, no nothing. He just placed the computer there, and look what happened. The kids entered the computer and they self-educated not only the use of the internet, but also the content which it offers. That's a very strong proof for making use of technology for children's education.
So that's a rebuttal, I guess, of some of the points that one or two of the panelists have made. Do you have a question, sir?
See what it says there? Time over.
Thank you. Last question.
Thank you. I just want to work a little bit for the teachers who were blamed for being not that competent. I agree with you to a certain extent. You have got bad teachers, you have good teachers, as always.
Yeah.
The problem you have is also, we are talking here about a very small percentage of highly educated parents who really try to do the very best for their children. You also have a huge amount of children who come from, let's say, families who are not that well around and where they not really get the best support from the background and from home. And there you have really a need to work on these kind of social networks, to bring them into these kind of social networks where they see that it's really an advantage for them to get trained and to get a better situation than their parents have. And there you really have to rely on teachers as well as on, let's say to a certain extent, social networks built up on internet, because it might be for them the first access to another world.
I think I agree with him, and I think that we keep talking about a small percentage of the population, and there is a huge percentage either that the parents, as he mentioned, don't care, or there aren't any other option for them. And we should use what we have to make a difference in the world, and the way to make a difference in the education world is technology. It might not be the best way, it's the only way that exists right now to close gaps, and that's what we should do.
Any other closing comments? And then I think our time is up.
I'd just like to say for the rest of the world, non-China, that I hope you get education right, because we're coming after you. And the thing that we always think about in China is that, you know, if you're 1 in a million in China, there are 1,300 people just like you. So we're working really hard to be competitive and get our education system right. So I hope you do too.
Jose,
thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.